When you're brainstorming, we have this principle called like one third, one third, one third. The first third of the ideas, let's say you're going to go for about 30 ideas. First third of the ideas generally tend to be the usual ideas, 8 to 10 ideas. You've thought of them before. You've experienced that. Then if you go beyond that, the next 10 or so tend to get a little goofier. They get a little funnier. Then the third is where the breakthroughs begin to happen. Right? That's where the new ideas, yeah. And so we call it the extended effort principle. Now, we're not talking a lot of time here. We're talking maybe 10 minutes, right? So yeah, just by taking 10 minutes. And so what tends to happen is when you have a well-defined problem that you go into that process with, the better ideas occur earlier in the process because you've already figured out what the problem is.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. 20-Minute Leaders is a proud supporter of Make-A-Wish Israel and Tech to Peace, and is in proud collaboration with Secret Chord Ventures, J Ventures, Riverside FM, Fusion VC, Birthright Excel, J Impact, Leap, Google for Startups, and Hippo, and in media partnership with CTech. Hello, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Let's talk about how to be creative. Yes, it's, possible to learn to be more creative. And today I am with Roger Firestien, Ph.D., who has trained more people to lead the creative process than anyone else in the world. He is senior faculty and associate professor at the Center for Applied Imagination at SUNY Buffalo State University. As president of Innovation Resources, Inc., he consults, creates training programs, runs breakthrough labs, and has created a series of courses for Open Sesame. He is the author of several popular books, including Create in a Flash, a leader's recipe for breakthrough innovation.
I think I saw a quote the other day that said, in the age of AI and robots, what the only thing we have left for us as humans is creativity, the ability to be creative. I work in natural language processing, and a lot of the things that I've been dealing with over the last few months is, this whole notion of creativity and originality. I think we had a Google engineer the other day claim sentience for a machine. So I think the question of creativity is coming up a lot these days. And here, Roger, you're a creativity expert. I think we can call you that. And so first I want to understand what does that even mean? What does that mean to be good at creativity?
It's really a great question. And kind of to give you some history on this, and this might lead into that. I'm originally from Colorado, and why don't we do the history? Could that help? Because that'll lead into this.
100%.
And so the way I kind of got to this is that I grew up on a farm in Colorado, and my mother made me take piano lessons, right? Didn't like my piano lessons, right? And when I was about 14, a minister in our church gave me a little 4-string guitar. And I fell in love with this guitar and practicing and playing music. And that eventually led me to teaching music in a music studio, doing private guitar lessons. And so I went off to college at the University of Northern Colorado, expecting to become a music major. I was going to be like a band teacher or something like that. And to make my way through college, I taught guitar lessons. And I was finding that my students were getting bored with their initial lessons. And so I had the idea that if I could get them to get a little bit more creative, they'd enjoy their music more.
Interesting.
So this is the summer of 1975, 1976, and I started reading about creativity. And there was this one place and two names that kept coming up consistently in the literature, and this place was called the Interdisciplinary Center for Creativity Studies at a place called Buffalo State College in Buffalo, New York. And then these two names, Sid Parnes and Ruth Knoller, and these were like the founders of the field. Well, in the summer of in early 1977, I called out here, and I discovered that I actually got to talk to Sid Parnes. Now that was crazy. I was 21 years old. I never talked to an author in my life. I got goosebumps. So I found out that they had this graduate program in creativity studies, which is the science and the study of creativity, how we create, how we come up with ideas. And it's based on a process. And we can talk more about that a little bit. And they had this annual conference. And so in June of 1977, I flew out here from Colorado, came to Buffalo, New York, studied, went to this Creative Problem Solving Institute, which was a gathering of people from all over the world studying various aspects of creativity. And then there's a graduate program that they had just started. And so I took a course in that. And when I went back to Colorado, my mom and my dad said, all you could talk about was creativity and the work that you did out there. And you were just so on fire with that. So I finished up my degree, and then I moved out here in 1978, and I got my master's degree in creativity studies in 1979. And I think I was like the fifth or the seventh person to get the degree. And now we graduated over like 800 graduate students.
Wow.
Yeah, with degrees. Yeah. And now it's called Creativity and Change Leadership. So what's the science of creativity? Well, our approach is really based on a process. And it's based on the work done by a gentleman named Alex Osborne. Now, Alex Osborne invented brainstorming. He was an advertising executive, and he's the O in the advertising agency, BBDO. Yeah. And his concern is that he had these young advertising executives, and they were very, very talented, but they weren't creative. And then he goes, well, you guys got to get creative. And well, the problem is they weren't trained to be creative. And so Osborne read all of the earlier books on creativity, sort of the process, the natural process of creativity of, you prepare for a long time and you kind of let the idea incubate. Then you get this idea, the aha moment, and then you verify it. Well, that's great if you got a lot of time. But what Osborne was after was the whole concept of deliberate creativity. How do you turn on your creativity at will instead of waiting for it to happen? Yeah, yeah. And then he invented brainstorming, which is a technique for coming up with lots of ideas, but that wasn't enough. And so it's not just enough to come up with ideas. You need to make sure that you're solving the right problem. And so he developed this whole process of first decide what you want to work on, get some data around it, define the problem, and we can talk more about problem definition because that's some of the work that I'm working on right now. Generate ideas for solving it, select the best of those ideas, refine them, and then build an action plan. And so that's where my work has really been over the last 45 plus years, is around the whole creative process. How do we deliberately make creativity happen in individuals and in organizations? And I've been teaching that for years and writing about it and stuff. And so that's kind of been the work and the passion around that. So that's really where, when you talk about what creativity is, my whole focus is on deliberate creativity. So we can talk more about how you can turn your creativity on at will, how you can solve the right problem. We can talk some more about that as we get further in. But that's kind of the journey so far. Yeah.
I mean, I think it sounds to me like there's sort of, a few different camps of people when it comes to creativity. There are some people that they say, it's just sort of this kind of spark that you have, in the shower or, when you're doing something random. And that is sort of this initial idea. And then there's, I guess, other notions of, okay, how can we develop techniques to actually come up with these same innovative ideas, but in more deliberate places. And I think that's what you mentioned. That's where your art is, right? You are in the deliberate phase.
Yeah, and it's the yes and. And one of the things that we found is that after you do a session where you're deliberately generating lots of ideas, and Michael, I'm talking about in the period of 5 minutes, a trained group can come up with 150, 200 ideas for solving a problem. It's very time efficient. The challenge that comes is sorting it through. That's what takes the time, not the generation. Sure. Yeah, but what we've done is we've done studies where, and this is some of my early studies that I did, is that I found that after I was in a session like this, you kind of get the wheels rolling, okay? And then that's when the idea comes up in the shower again, boom. So when I work with groups and I say, now we've done some work on generating some ideas for this problem, I recommend that you keep a paper or you keep your smartphone ready by you, because you're going to have, this has stirred some things up. You're going to have some ideas that are just going to come to you just almost naturally. Capture them because you got stuff shook loose up here and you're going to make some more connections. And we've got some research around that actually validates that. So it is a yes and, yeah.
And so is this, how much of this is, more science-based, neuroscience, trying to figure out what's happening in the brain, what's happening in physiologically, rather than, a little bit more, I don't even know I don't know, I guess, random spiritual figure. You can help me classify this better.
Yeah, let's go to that. Because what I got a degree in is I got a Master of Science, okay? Not a Master of Arts. And to be able to prove that this stuff works, this creativity training works, we had to validate that. So in the late 1960s, early 1970s, the largest study on the deliberate the largest study on the deliberate fostering of creativity was conducted at SUNY Buffalo State. And what they did was they took freshmen, they divided them into two groups. They gave them 4 semesters of training in creative problem solving back as it was back then. They evaluated the results. They threw all sorts of psychological instruments at them. And what they found was that the folks that were trained in this stuff did better in math. They came up with English topics better. But the big thing is they were able to solve personal problems like getting along with their roommates, getting along with their parents much better because they learned this process. Yeah. So that's kind of the science side of it. Now, the other side of it is like, it's such an extraordinary phenomenon. And, we look at creativity because it's all inclusive. And researchers have studied creativity in like 4 areas: the creative person, the creative process, the creative product, or the creative environment. We call that press, kind of the interaction of the person and their environment.
Sure.
Now, the creative person, that's sort of the psychological approach. And, that's the people that are studying these folks that, you see that seem to be naturally creative, coming up with ideas. Okay. That's the personality approach. The other one is the process approach, which is one I'm involved in. Product approach, that's aesthetics, that's art, that's product development. And then the environment for creativity, a lot of the folks in the organizational arena have studied that. What's the environment that we can create in organizations to help our people to become more creative? And we can certainly talk about it as well, because I've spent some time there as well. So that's kind of the way we study it. So it's a yes and, it is both deliberate, it is both unconscious, it is both spiritual. And now we have CT scans and we have neuroscience that's actually showing us how folks are actually how their brains are lighting up when they're making ideas, and it is not just your right brain, it's not just your left brain, but creativity is a whole brain phenomenon. So when you're coming up with ideas, when you're solving a creative problem, what they find is the whole brain lights up because it's all of this stuff is going on up there. You're making connections, you're redefining problems, you're working in spaces that are non-verbal. You're working in verbal spaces. So, yeah.
Interesting. So what are some non-trivial things that myself and perhaps some of my young entrepreneur friends should keep in mind as we're thinking through creativity or being creative as leaders or creating a creative culture within our companies?
Yeah. Let's talk about, let me make sure I get to the creative culture. Okay. Because we're doing some writing about that. So there's a couple things that you can do. First off, I'm working on a book right now called Solve the Real Problem, because as I've worked through this business in the last 40 plus years, there's about a 99% chance of what you think is the problem really isn't the problem at all. It's a symptom. It's what the boss tells you is the problem. It's a first impression of what you think is the problem. Yeah. So first thing to do is that when you encounter a problem is pause. Okay. And I'm not saying, pause for a long time. Take about 5 to 6 minutes to figure out what you really believe the problem is. And the way we do that is we generate what we call creative questions. Now, people are real familiar with generating creative ideas. All right. That's kind of the way people think about creativity. Brainstorming, we come up with lots of ideas, but we're working now. Let's back up. And let's generate, just like we generate lots of ideas when we're solving a problem, let's generate lots of creative questions. And we start them with words like how to, or how might be, or what might be all the ways to. So come up with 10 or 15 creative questions. How to, how might, how to. Then when you've done that, you've had a pretty good look at the problem space. Then pick the creative question that looks the best for you, generate some ideas for solving that. Now, we've got some research studies on that. And a number of years ago, a colleague of mine did a study, and he divided groups. These were students. He divided them into, because you do a lot of research on students when you're and he divided these groups into 2 groups. And one group was given a problem to solve, and another group was given the same problem to solve. The first group, they said, now just go to work on the problem to solve it, okay? And then they evaluated the ideas for originality and effectiveness. The second group, they said, now figure out what the real problem is first, and then generate ideas for solving it. And what they found was that the group that spent the time figuring out what the real problem was had better ideas, more original ideas that really did solve the problem. Now, in the research study, I discovered that they didn't tell me how much time it took for these folks to redefine the problem. So I called the researcher, actually emailed him, and I said, and this was work done by a gentleman named Mark Runco. I said, Mark, in your study, you didn't say how much time you gave these people to redefine the problem. He said, well, actually, he said, we gave them no time limit. He said, we said, take as much time as you want to redefine the problem. But in actuality, they took between 5 to 6 minutes to redefine what the problem was. And they came up with significantly better ideas. So
Interesting.
just by stepping back, taking 5 minutes, figure out what the real problem is first, then generating ideas for solving it. But most people, or many people, they think problem, answer, problem, answer, problem, answer. So just by pausing, generating a few creative questions, and then generating ideas for solving it, the effectiveness is extraordinary. And the few times where we found that the best, and so oftentimes what then happens is that you'll get your better ideas early on in the process. Oftentimes when you're generating ideas, and you probably experienced this, when you're brainstorming, we have this principle called like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The first third of the ideas, let's say you're going to go for about 30 ideas. First third of the ideas generally tend to be the usual ideas, 8 to 10 ideas. You've thought of them before. You've experienced that. Then if you go beyond that, the next 10 or so tend to get a little goofier. They get a little funnier. Then the third is where the breakthroughs begin to happen. Right? That's where the new ideas, yeah. And so we call it the extended effort principle. Now, we're not talking a lot of time here. We're talking maybe 10 minutes, right? So yeah, just by taking 10 minutes. And so what tends to happen is when you have a well-defined problem that you go into that process with, the better ideas occur earlier in the process because you've already figured out what the problem is. So, that's just one is figure out what the real problem is first before you go off to solve it. And I can say that's probably, and then when you're coming up with ideas, don't judge them, just let them come out. And then another thing that we like to use is creativity is connection making. And so we have a technique called forced connections where we ask you to just look around the room and say, what ideas to get from my smartphone for solving this, or from that clock over there, from the books, making connections that way. Because if you look at the history of creativity, it's the connection making process. For example, a number of years ago, I interviewed the gentleman that invented the pacemaker, and his inspiration for the pacemaker was a flashing traffic signal.
Interesting.
Boom, boom. Yeah. And there's countless examples of that in science and art, where you make a connection from one area into another area. And so when we have people working on problems together, we ask people to come from different disciplines to be working on it. Because as you've experienced, if you have the same people that have the same knowledge, so the thing is, I go into an organization, they say, well, we need to have all the technical people on this problem.
Sure.
I'll say, well, if the technical people haven't solved it, why do we have more technical people on it? All right. And so when we work with organizations, and we bring in people that we call creative catalysts. They're trained in creative problem solving. They don't know the problem, and it's amazing the stuff that happens. And so that's a product that we're calling the Breakthrough Lab that we're doing, and it's working out great. It works virtually and in person. So yeah.
Why are you so invested in this? Why do you care so much about creativity, about helping people become creative? Why? What is it about your work that ties back to sort of who you are as a person?
I am so glad you asked that question, because as I was preparing for this, I thought more about that. And I think there's a couple of things. One, when I'm teaching, I love to watch the light bulbs come on people's heads. And I teach the introductory graduate class level. I don't teach the advanced level, because my philosophy is that if you get the basics down well, you're going to be fine. And I've seen people come into classes because we work on real problems. And it's like we apply this process to what you want to work on. So, for example, one young lady came in, this is probably about 4 or 5 years ago. She said, I want to lose weight. Okay, well, we worked and we redefined the problem, and this class met on the weekends. So a few weeks later, we met again, and she came back and she said, I want to tell you what I've done since we had our last class. She goes, I published a book I started on when I was 4. I've started a nonprofit organization. I'm putting together a calendar that raises money for domestic violence prevention. And then 6 months later down the road, she is at our state capitol proposing legislation to deal with domestic violence. All right.
Incredible.
And because she redefined the problem and then so I saw her about a year or so later she was taking an advanced class. And I said, hey, how are you? She goes, you know what? I lost the weight. I'm paying back the student loans, and the legislation is going through. It's stuff like that. I mean, people start businesses, they start relationships. And, I was thinking about this today. Just about all of the faculty now at the Center for Creativity and Change Leadership, they've been my students. And now they get to teach me. So that's one thing. And then, as I was coming up on this, it was the interaction. It was working with the groups. It was working with students, and I still love the teaching, but I'm really finding a lot of fun now, working on the new books like, Create in a Flash, Why Didn't I Think of That, which is a release, and now the new book called Solve the Real Problem. Because these books are different. They're pictures. We have an art director, and there's a whole variety. You open up the book, and it's kind of my view is a book should be a work of art. And when you open this book up, it's like, boy, that's really cool. That's really cool. And so there's that. And then as I was thinking about this, I also kind of went back to kind of my personal vision. And I think I came up with this like sometime in like the early 80s. And I have it here. And it's, my vision has been to make creativity simple, make creativity practical, and help people apply creativity in their world. Make creativity simple, make it practical, and help people apply creativity in their world. Yeah. And so if it's not simple, people aren't going to use it. And so there's a lot of science and stuff that goes around this. And, people will oftentimes, conflate things because, that's kind of the nature of no. We just cut through all that, make it simple. So, yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Roger, I want to thank you so much for this time. 20 minutes fly by so fast, but I absolutely loved it. And
thank you.
And it definitely sparks my curiosity for figuring out what is creativity and how to foster creativity. Mm-hmm. And so I look forward to checking more of your work and learning more from your journey. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Michael. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.